Good morning. Glad to have you with us this morning. Before we get started in here, I must say I'm glad that a couple of folks here I see. Justin, you got the memo? Today's yellow shirt day. You can't see. Blair got it. I see. The yellow shirt. All right. In here, I see in the back, we got one of the kids in the back. The yellow shirt. Today's yellow shirt day. If you didn't get the memo. First service, middle service, we had about 8 people in yellow shirts, and first service we had about a half a dozen. So, yellow shirt day. So. As you are getting ready for church this morning, getting up and getting cleaned up and getting ready and going to breakfast this morning, having breakfast and stuff, and driving over here, what were your expectations about when you got here this morning? What were you expecting when you got here? Speak up, it's okay. Yeah. Fellowship, all right. What else? What? Sunday school? Somebody in the back. Fresh start, okay. Worship, okay. Right? Probably maybe a good cup of coffee, right? And here it's okay, All right, well, we have it. I was, as I was going to when I visit my mother's church down in Texas, first couple of times I did it, I think they finally kind of got the message. I've been there enough times now, but the first couple of times they were there, you'd sit there in church, right, and you'd be going, please don't make me stand, please don't make me stand, please don't make me stand, right? If you're a first-time guest this morning, we're not going to have you stand. You can just stand with everybody else, but not on your own. Because I asked this question, what are you expecting this morning? And I asked this at the first 2 services, and I had somebody come up to me after the second service. And in all seriousness, they looked at me and they said, you said, what were you expecting this morning? And they said, the last thing we were expecting from you, Pastor Mark, is one of those open-ended questions. You don't start your sermons that way. That's the other guy who does that. This is about expectations this morning. Because this text is all about expectations. It's this expectation, because in Jesus' day, these religious people, these religious going on, the Pharisees and Sadducees, it talks in the text, these religious people had their expectations of what God was going to do when he came back. And God was going to deal with those people. I'm going to stop, make sure I define those people, all right? Those people, right? Those people, to help you understand, is if you're from Mizzou, anybody from Kansas is of those people. Got it? All right? If you're a motorcycle rider like me, anybody in a cage is those people. All right? It's those people. And it said God was going to deal with those people, all right? That's not, you got to make sure you understand what their meaning here is. It's like my mother used to do occasionally to me, all right? I'd be in my room after doing something I shouldn't have been doing, and Mother would walk into the room, and she'd get that mom look on her face, and she'd, young man, your father will deal with this when he gets home, right? That's what we're talking about. It's saying God's going to deal with this when he comes down here. That's what they were looking at. That those people in the world, the sick, the ill, those people didn't measure up in here. The lame in here, and especially anybody who was a non-Jew. The Romans, the Greeks, all the other people, they were all those people. That God's going to come down here and deal with those people when he gets here. And so what happens is when Jesus shows up, Jesus who is God made flesh, the great I am, who takes human form, when God shows up, this story starts in Matthew chapter 8 and what he's doing in here. First thing that comes to him in here is lepers come up to Jesus. Now, in Jesus' day here, leprosy was one of those horrible diseases. It's a disfiguring disease where you lose fingers and digits and noses, and it's very painful. It's extremely contagious. If you had leprosy, you were an outcast. You're not only outcast to your family, but you were literally tossed out of the city and left on your own. If your family was going to bring you something to help you out, what they would do is they would find a tree or something to drop it off at, leave it there, and then leave, and then a couple hours later, you could come and pick it up. They were the outcasts. So what happens here is you've got two lepers coming up to Jesus, and Jesus, instead of running away and shunning them, he gets right up in their faces and heals them. Then it goes right to the next thing here. It says a centurion comes to Jesus. And I hope you catch that word, because a centurion means he's a Roman. He's decisively one of those people. A centurion comes to Jesus about his servant. And not only did Jesus heal a centurion's servant, he heals a servant. That's a double whammy here. Jesus heals a centurion's servant. And he does it by remote control. He just says it happens. And then again, right afterwards, you find Jesus. There's people with all kinds of diseases, all kinds of illnesses. You name it, runs the gamut. They're all coming to Jesus. And as they come to Jesus, instead of Jesus running away and hiding, which the religious people said he should do, he's taking the time and healing all those people. And then comes right afterwards. They have two guys with demons. It's important you catch that word as well, demons. That's of the devil. That's Satan. Because we see Satan and we see anything related to Satan or the devil these days, we run like crazy. We hightail it, find that if it's over here, we find the opposite direction and head in the opposite direction and run away. But Jesus doesn't. Jesus goes right up to them, and Jesus goes right to them and heals them, casts it out, confronts it head on. And then again, right afterwards, you've got a man who's paralyzed. In this day, paralyzed people were the ones who were outcasts as well. If you were paralyzed, if you were sick, if you had any of those infirmities, any of those illnesses, glasses, any of those things going in, walkers, any of those things that we take for granted today, if you had any of that stuff going on, you were an outcast, you were unclean, run away from it. But Jesus doesn't. He goes in here and he heals the guy with the paralyzed guy. And then again, right after this, these occur, just bang, bang, bang in order. What happens is there's a lady in here, it says, she's had some sort of bleeding illness. We don't know what it says, but she was bleeding illness, all right, for years. Which makes her terribly unclean, unsanitary, an outcast. But she comes up and she touches the very bottom of Jesus' garment, the robe he's got on, just the very bottom. Now, for the religious people, you need to understand, for the religious people that's happening in Jesus' day, at this point in time, if she would have touched the robe of a Pharisee, she probably would have been stoned on the spot. But Jesus takes and Jesus heals her. And then, believe it or not, does one better and sits there and goes into the house of a dead girl, which you never went around the dead people, but she went into the house of a dead girl, takes her hand, picks her up, and heals her. All this stuff that they're expecting the Messiah to run away from, Jesus is there, and Jesus is hanging out with them. And that's who Jesus spends his time with. That's who Jesus is there with. So, shift your gears a second. Deep breath, gear shift. All right, if you've been to Kenya, because we got some people here that have been to Kenya. Blair's been to Kenya, Don's been to Kenya. If you've been to Kenya, you guys can't answer this next question. Got it? You'll understand why when I get you there, right? When I say the word Muslim, what's the first thing that pops into your mind? What? Muslim with woman garb. I heard somebody say it in the back. Terrorist. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Right, there's other things, right? There's all kinds of stuff we could talk about, right? The clothing and the women wearing the veil and the full garment, whatever that's called, right? And in here, and geography and customs and stuff. But the one I heard in the back, right? Terrorist. Because we've been conditioned in this country, right? When we hear the word Muslim, we think terrorist. That's what our conditioning says. That's how our conditioning runs in this country, right? I don't know about you guys when you talk about our experience, your experience in Kenya, but I talk about our experience in Kenya and talk about the trips we've made and my trip going to Kenya. And here you talk about what's going on and you tell the story about in here. And you get to the point in the story is that you say, and we went to an area that's 95% Muslim. And to a person, the first thing they will interrupt the story and they will ask, were you safe? Right? Were you safe? That's the expectation. That's the expectation we have. And you get over there and your expectations are blown up. Because you get over there and you realize and you find out the people who are over there are a lot like us. They're kind, they're warm, they're peaceful. They're trying to do the best for their family. Trying to put food on the table and raise their kids and have a peaceful place to live and a peaceful environment going in here. They're respectful. They were sitting there talking after one of the service, the guys that had been there reminded me in here, right? If you go into today's world, if you open your door and you got 5 or 6 guys standing at your door and they said they want to talk to you about Jesus, you're going to slam the door in their face, right? In Kenya, what happens, right? Come on in, right? They desperately, not only are they kind and warming in those things, but they want to talk about Jesus. They want to talk about him. They want willing to talk about it. We've got this faith line. We've got this faith issue here. But they'll talk about Jesus. They'll talk about Jesus as long as you want to stand there. Because there's an expectation, I think, that we have in our church. This church, this Christian church in here. There's expectation we have. And it's this. As we realize is that God accepts us how we are. That God accepts us, our flaws and our mistakes and stuff, no matter how we are at, that God will accept us as we are. But once he accepts us, we're going to get our act together, right? We're going to shape up our lives and shape up our life and get our act together. And what happens here is you find Jesus in this story is defying expectations. Because that's the same thing that the religious people of the day thought of the people, is that the people should get their act together and then God will come and hang out with them. And Jesus defies expectations. Brennan Manning, the Catholic priest, wrote a great book about these very people we're talking about this morning, these tax collectors and sinners, these outcasts. He calls them ragamuffins. The cast-offs, the forgottens, the people who are ignored, the people who are thrown away, those people who don't have their lives together. Those are the people, those sick, those lame, that don't have their lives together. That's who Jesus is hanging out with. That's who Jesus is walking around with. That's who Jesus is with in there. And that's who he lives with. I have a book on my bookshelf, and I must admit that I think it's got the absolute perfect title of a Christian book. The title is simply, No Perfect People Allowed. And I love it. But you can tell what the book is simply by the title, No Perfect People Allowed. Because if you're sitting there and if your relationship with God is 100% and you and God are one-on-one and you're seeing eye to eye and everything, if you're not having any problems, if you're not dealing with any illnesses, if you're not dealing with any stuff in your life, if you don't have any issues going on in your world, if you don't have the stuff happening, if you don't have those burdens you're in the world, if you don't have any of that stuff going on in your life, this is probably not the place for you. Because I think we should put a sign on the outside of the door that says no perfect people allowed. Because the reality of the world is there's no perfect people. Pastor John's got a great line here, and you've heard him talk about it, right? Fail forward. I'm sorry, I fail backwards. More times when I fail, I'm failing backwards. Sometimes in the world, right? It's one step forward and 5 steps back. That's where we're at sometimes. And we have this thing in our world, right? And we deal with one thing in our world, and we deal with this over here, and we take care of this over here. And as this is taken care of over here, all of a sudden this over here blows up in our face. And it seems like we're just fighting the fight. It's not one thing, it's the other, right? There's a name for this, by the way. Did you catch the name? It's called sin. All right? It's called sin. But this is who Jesus is hanging out with. The people who don't have their lives together. The people who struggle. Yeah, we're part of the family. Yeah, we have his name. Yes, we're part in here. But Jesus hangs out with the people who don't have their lives together. Jesus hangs out with the people, the ragamuffins of the world, the people who are struggling, the people who are downcast, the people who are out, shut aside, all those people that we talked about. That's who Jesus hangs out with. Jesus hangs out with us. St. Paul in his letters, I've been struggling all morning to remember the citations in here, so I apologize. St. Paul in his letters, he talks about 2 things. He talks about us dwelling in Christ, but also Christ dwelling in us. Where does Jesus hang out? With you. With you. He hangs out with you as the people of God, you as his church, capital C. But he hangs out with you in your heart, inside of you. He puts himself there. That's a statement of what you're worth. It's a statement of who you are. It's a statement of what he says about you. See, he hangs out with you. He dwells inside of you. He lives with you. And that's who you are. That's because that's who he says you are. And that's what we hang on to. So we, the ragamuffins of the world, we the ones who are the outcasts. They asked Jesus, his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? And he nails it on the head. He eats and dwells and lives with us, the tax collectors and the sinners. Amen.